So to kind of paint the picture for what I'm going to talk about, um, if we remember back to before the block editor, where we built sites using a classic editor, using meta boxes, making heavy use of custom post types, things like that. Um, let's say you had a requirement from a client that they have maybe dozens, hundreds of testimonials that they have from their own clients, their own customers, and they want to be able to display them in their WordPress site in different places, different pages, and blog posts, sales, upsells, different things like that. Uh, in the pre-Gutenberg days, the way we would probably go about that, if you're want to do custom code, or you'd probably find a plugin that does exactly this, is you'd create a custom post type. And with that custom post type, you would say, okay, we're going to have thumbnails for the featured images for these things. We're going to have the content of the custom post type. Maybe we'll make that the testimonial. The title might be this. We might add a custom meta box. We can get all this different information. And then we'll give our clients different short codes and things like that. And whenever they want to insert one of these testimonials somewhere into their site, they can use one of these short codes that they created and say, okay, here's that testimonial. And of course that worked. But along came Gutenberg, and kind of one of the promises that Gutenberg gave us was, okay, that's a way that you can do things for your clients, but it's kind of awkward, right? You're editing something that isn't exactly what the user is going to see. If they want to get this particular testimonial, they have to go back to the testimonials list somewhere over else in a custom post type. They have to like copy the ID or copy the shortcode or something like that, insert it into their post. If they want to make changes, they're going back and forth. It's kind of a pretty crummy experience in some ways. And so what was cool about Gutenberg is Gutenberg gave us the ability to have blocks. So we can now have creating like a block with a testimonial pattern. So for example, welcome to the block editor. So let's say, for instance, if we were to do this right now with Gutenberg, or when Gutenberg came out, it would be a little bit different. Let's see if we can find a testimonial pattern. I think there are some testimonial patterns. Here we go. So let's say this might be a testimonial that you could then say, okay, we can replace this image with the one of the customer that we want. We can give them their text here. We can set the custom person who set this. And this is great, right? We have a really nice visual way of editing that testimonial. It looks great on the site. But now let's say we want to use this in another place, maybe in another blog post, something like that. Well, we could copy and paste this and go to another one and try and keep the things in sync. But of course, Gutenberg has that Gutenberg has that feature called reusable blocks. So if we took all of these things, let's grab all of those, we can convert this into a reusable block. So we could say testimonial number 1. And so then whenever we want to in our site, we could copy and paste. We can say, okay, let's insert testimonial number 1 as our reusable block. And okay, that works. We can make the changes that we want to, things like that. But that's kind of a bit limiting. If we remember back to what we could do with custom post types, one of the things that were powerful about them is that we could render it however we wanted. We could use that bits of data in different places. Let's say we wanted to have an archive page on our website that would display all the list of testimonials. If you were doing this with reusable blocks, we'd have to create a page with testimonials, and we'd have to add every single testimonial reusable block to that page, and remember to do that every time. And then let's say we wanted to have a completely different design, we'd have no way of doing that, right? Because this is just a block. It's just a series of different blocks. Yeah, if you change one of the reusable blocks, it changes all of them. So it would save that, but this is just a text, and this is just an image. This is just some text here. These are 2 horizontal lines. If we wanted to change the way that all testimonials is displayed on our site, we would have to go through every single testimonial reusable block and change that. Not to mention that it would be kind of impossible to maintain if, let's say, we want to have 2 different designs of this testimonial block. How do we even do something like that? That'd be pretty difficult. And I think it's kind of one of the holes that a lot of people have kind of talked about of, well, I want to be able to have the power of rendering all this information however I want to, accessing it in whatever ways I want to. But I still want to be able to give my client a rich experience where they're editing something in a WYSIWYG fashion. So I hope I've kind of sold the kind of like idea and the pain point there of how things work right now with blocks, and how in some cases that can be a limitation for things, especially when you're thinking before of how we would do things with custom post types and stuff like that. One of the new features that if you watch one of our what's new in WordPress videos, I think for WordPress 5.7, if you remember, that's when the Reusable Blocks interface changed. So starting WordPress 5.7, if I make a change to this reusable block, let's say, let's add an exclamation point. When I go over here to update, I see this new panel that says, okay, here's the reusable block, and I'm going to save now the reusable block, but I could also make changes to the regular content of the post. And now when I go over here to update, you'll see, okay, I'm updating the page, I'm updating the reusable block, I could uncheck that, check this. And so essentially what's going on here is WordPress now is keeping track of all the different things that are being edited. So right now we're editing this reusable block, but then we're going over here and we're editing this block. And when you go over to save, you're saving that whole page or whatever different blocks you want to. And this was kind of like a minor feature that's introduced, but it introduces some really cool functionality that we can take advantage if we want to combine these two worlds. If we want to say, okay, I want to be able to give my clients a rich editing experience, but I also want to be able to do things with this data in a smart way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give you a demo of different things that you can do with this functionality, and then we'll take a peek at the code a bit. At some point later this week, I'll probably be uploading all this code up onto GitHub. And when I do, I'll make sure to leave a comment on the meetup post. But yeah, so let's dive into kind of like how that could work. So I've created a custom testimonial block. And the first thing you do when you enter a testimonial block is you can choose either to select an existing testimonial or you can create a new testimonial. For now, let's select an existing testimonial. I'm going to select one here from John Smith. And you can see I now have this simple little testimonial. It has an image. This is all a custom block. It has an image that if I want to, I can replace and pull in a custom one. It has text that I can edit. It has the name of the person, place for the title, all of that kind of stuff. But you can see when I inserted this and when I change that image, we have a new thing over here in saving. We have a testimonial section. And it has John Smith, which is where this testimonial is coming from. And so this testimonial, if we look at the raw like code editor view, you'll see that it's just a testimonial. It's a dynamic block. This isn't like saving this specific HTML here. It's just it's a dynamic block that saves all of its information to a custom post type entry. And so we can take a look at what that looks like. So go back to here. You'll see I have my testimonials custom post type. And if we look at John Smith, we can see that whole block there. And so this kind of functions a little bit similar to how reusable blocks work. And you can see I have my testimonial. You can see the image that I updated over there has been updated here. It's been updated everywhere. I can make the changes to the text that I want to, any of those things. CEO of cool stuff and things. And when I update this, it's going to update everywhere this is being used. And so, yeah, so what's happening under the hood here is that it is saving this testimonial content to the excerpt of this custom post type. This is the title, as you can see here. If we go ahead and we change this title, let's say we change this to Jonathan Smith, you can see that those two are in sync. This is the featured image. So you can see we're editing the featured image, and we can do it through here. But when I do, it's updating the featured image for the post. The CEO of cool stuff and things, that's actually from custom metadata with a custom meta key that we've registered. So all this is going into a kind of programmatic place. And that lets us do a couple of really cool things. So I'm going to go over here to my sample page, I think. So you can see a couple of examples of this, of these different testimonials in use. And you can see what I'm able to do is this is the same testimonial data. It's the same Jonathan Smith. You see it's been updated. But over here, I'm presenting it a bit differently. I'm being able to mix and match attributes. So here, this one has color. So I can set a custom background color if I want. And this is just affecting how this testimonial is displayed. Whereas the actual data here, the Jonathan Smith part, the lorem ipsum, the CEO of Cool Stuff and Things, this is all the actual data that's being saved to the custom post type. And we're kind of getting back to that separation between data and UI and presentation. The way they're editing it will reflect how it looks on the site. We can take a look at that. Permalink. We can see it looks almost identical. That's a bug that I need to fix because it's not a square image. But yeah, as you can see, this is now the data. We have this custom presentation that we've defining in this particular instance of this testimonial. And that's how it gets displayed on the front end. And of course, then we can say, let's go back to an image that is actually square. We go to update. We can see that we've updated the page and we've updated the testimonial. And all back to normal. And so this is a full custom post type, and a regular post, it even has its own page. Let me go back and show that, which means there's some other really cool things that we can do. So you can see this is the Jonathan Smith testimonial on its own page. You can see the URL, testimonial/John Smith, and this is just what that testimonial will appear like. I've done a little bit of editing because it's a custom post type. I can use regular templates like you'd be used to for in a theme. So you can see the template here is one that is specific to this custom post type. And I've done that to remove the title and just render the block, things like that. But because it's a custom post type, if you remember from our WordPress 5.8 talk, we talked about the query loop blocks and some cool things you can do about that. So I'm going to create a new testimonials query archive page. And I'm going to insert a query loop. And I registered a block pattern for this, so we don't have to do this entry ourselves. We can scroll on over. And we'll see here is our preview of what a testimonials query loop would look like. So I'm going to choose this block pattern. And you can see if we go into the query, we're searching for the testimonial post type. We could order if we wanted to. If we wanted to, we could filter by authors. We could filter with a search keyword, things like that. And then for each testimonial inside this loop, it's rendering the testimonial block. And if I wanted to, I could even make changes to this testimonial here. I'm not sure if it's a great idea, but I could. For instance, let's say we want to, let's remove this bold and italics. When I go into publish, you can see I've actually edited Sydney Applebaum's testimonial. And the same way as before, where I can separate visual controls, I can do that same thing here. So you can see before we had that crazy looking testimonial for Jonathan Smith, but here this is just a regular one. If we wanted to change these, we can say, okay, maybe let's hide the client information. You can see the client gets hidden. I have it set up so that when you're inside the block, the client always shows. So you can edit that information, but you can see it's hidden here. But so yeah, let's say we wanted to disable the client. We could then select our color. We can say maybe we want these on blue. We can give these maybe some text that is readable. Let's take that and make it dark. There we go, that's readable. And so then we have on our page here, we have this testimonials query archive that has a list of all the testimonials. And we can use all of that advanced query block functionality. So we can say, where are we? Go up to query loop. We can say, okay, maybe I only want one per page. I only have 2 set up on this site. Maybe we want 3 per page, things like that. We can, like I said, we can do those filterings with post type and filters and stuff like that. So you can make this really dynamic. But yeah, so again, these are custom post types. So if we go over to, let's find our testimonial again. Oops. You can see here is our John Smith testimonial, back to looking like normal. This is a testimonial with an archive. So we can see, okay, here is the archives testimonials, and this has all the lists on the site. And this is just a regular custom post type archive. And in this case, it's rendering every single block. But because it's a custom post type, we can do whatever we want. So I've set up a custom page template, custom template. And you see this is just a regular WordPress page. And kind of like in the old school days when we wanted to do things like this, I've set up a testimonials list template. And if we take a look at what this actually looks like, I can provide a completely different way of rendering this information. So in this case, with this template, I've decided to just render the built-in block quote with a site, and that's it. And because all of this is stored into a custom post type, I can make all of that dynamic. I can make it do literally whatever I want, which I think is really neat. So what I'm going to do now, I kind of like to gauge how many people have explored building their own blocks. If people could chime in the chat. I'm just going to inform how I kind of talk about this custom code and how much we want to dive into it, or if we want to kind of just do a bit. Okay. So I'll take a kind of brief look at kind of what the code looks like for this. Like I said, I'm probably going to be turning this into somewhat of a plugin that exists on .org, but I'm also going to post up the code to GitHub so you can take a more in-depth look. But I'll kind of give you a brief overview of what we're doing that's interesting here. Let's go over to PHP Storm. Actually, hold on. Let me change something really quick. Okay. Screen share. Okay, so hopefully y'all can see this code. Let me go into the actual thing that I want here. Okay, so this is a regular block, and I'm gonna hop into, hold on, this over here. And we have an edit function for our block. And it's, some things are kind of normal. So you can see we have a function edit, we're pulling in our attributes, we have our block props, and then we start doing some things that are custom here. So what this is working off of is some new functionality that was introduced a few releases ago called entity providers and entity hooks. So what we're telling, let me go back for 1 second. So we've created this custom testimonial block, and the way this testimonial block behaves differently in different contexts. You saw when it was inside the query loop that it's displaying the current testimonial for that query. You saw when we were on the testimonials page and editing a specific testimonial in that custom post type, you could see that it was saying, okay, we're just going to assume it's this testimonial. You saw I didn't have to choose first which one I wanted to use. And then everywhere else, we're presenting an interface to the user to say, okay, select what testimonial you want to display or create a new one. And so the way we're doing this is we're having the same reusable function, and this is kind of like the main bit of our actual edit function. And this part, if you've worked on custom blocks before, might start to look a little bit familiar. We have our block controls and a toolbar. We have our inspector controls, which is what we're using to say whether we want to display the client or not. And then we have our editing stuff. So we have the image that's displayed, and we have ways to upload the image, which we didn't show, but you can drag and drop into that block, that kind of stuff. We have a rich text for the testimonial clients, and we have our rich texts for the client name and for their like job title or position. But what's special about this is we're using this function that I've called use testimonial prop. But what use testimonial prop is this actually using a function called use entity prop. that is from WordPress core. And essentially what this does is this says, okay, I see that you want to edit some kind of entity. An entity, you can think of like, it's a way that data is stored inside of WordPress in a generic way. Post types are entities, taxonomies are entities, users are entities, pretty much everything is an entity. And so what we tell you as entity prop is we have a specific kind of entity we're looking for, which is our custom post type, but we're looking for a specific custom post type instance, which are called a testy. And then we say whatever prop we want to listen to. So you can see how we use this. We're saying, okay, we have the status prop that I want to edit. We have the title that I want to edit. We have the content, which I want to edit, which is in the excerpt field. We have the job title, which I want to edit, and we are storing that in custom post type meta. And these just returns the values and the setters that you can use like anything else. If you've used, for instance, attributes and set attributes, you can kind of use this similarly, but it's a attribute that isn't stored to the attributes block JSON. Instead, it's stored to a custom post type prop. This is the title, the excerpt, etc. And then you can see in our rich text and things like that, they just behave as normal. So we have a value, we're saying this is the content, the on change is the set content. And so what happens here is we're doing a little bit of dynamics to figure out what's going on. So we're checking what the current post type is, and we're saying, okay, let's reach out to the editor store and figure out the current post type. If the user is editing the attesty post type, so that's when they're in the user interface, they're under testimonials, they've selected the testimonial they want to edit, then we render, oops, that's not the one I want to. If current post type is attesty, then we just render the article and we render the content, which is that function that I showed you before, our edit function that handles everything. Otherwise, we render our user interface for the chooser. And that's the bit that I showed you first, where it says, okay, do you want to choose an existing testimonial or create a new one? And we say to the user, okay, choose one if we don't have any ID. And then in this case, we are using attributes. So we're saying, okay, this is a block instance. And for this block instance, it has a particular testimonial ID. And so that's why we're storing in the attributes here. We have some placeholders. And then once we have the actual entity and we've determined its value, we use this cool component called an entity provider. And so what that does is it says to WordPress, it says, okay, any components that are rendering inside this entity provider component, any of those that are listening with use entity prop for this kind of post type, this type of attesty, give them information about this post ID. And so that means that we can say, okay, this is that entity provider here. We're rendering the content the same way as we did before. And this whole thing is agnostic. It just knows I use entity prop, and the rest of the block is saying, okay, in this particular instance, you're editing this entity. If you are editing the current post type, that entity will be the actual post that you're editing. So we don't have to provide any editing prompt, any entity provider. And then this last one is a little bit special. This is how we enable the integration with a query loop. So we're saying, okay, we're listening to something called block context. And what block context is it's kind of a key value store where you're saying, okay, I want to listen for certain particular bits of information. And my block is saying, okay, I want to receive information about the post type, and I want to receive information about the post ID. And so when I have these bits of context, I'm now rendering an entity provider like I was doing before. But this time I'm rendering one that is specific to the entity that is being showed in that post template. And then it's just the same as normal, I'm rendering an article with some content. And so because this is a dynamic block, I then have my render function. And this is what actually spits out the HTML. And so what this means is that if in the future, for instance, we want a new design for testimonials and we want that to appear everywhere, or we have some new functionality, I can make that change to this render function for this dynamic block and have it affect everything. Not need to do any updates, not need any versioning, anything like that. And the last thing that I want to look at in terms of code to kind of show, you can see this is how we're registering our custom post type. The important bits are we're marking this as public so we can get URLs generated and things like that. We're opting into having the title, the editor, the excerpt, the thumbnail, custom fields. We're providing a template. And so this is when you go to create a new testimonial, if you create a new testimonial via the UI, you'll be shown the testimonial template, and we're locking that down. So when someone edits that custom post type for testimonials, they can't insert in other blocks and break things like that. And all of that bit is normal. And then the only other kind of weird thing to be aware of is that we're also filtering the default content of a post. And so when we create a new post of this custom post type, if there's no content available for it, and this is what's run with like get default post to edit, we set up a fake block that gets initialized with this information. And the reason that we're doing that is because our custom post type also has a custom controller. And there are different ways that you could go about doing this, but this is how I chose to. Where when you create a new testimonial, which I realize I didn't demo for you, but I'll do that in a second, excuse me. We're creating what's called an auto draft in WordPress, and we're doing that by calling get default post to edit. And that's creating an auto draft so that if someone creates a whole bunch of testimonials in a row, but doesn't go to save them, they get automatically cleaned up by WordPress. But yeah, so I'm going to go back to, I just want to demo that one thing to show you how that flow works. And then, yeah, we can open up for any questions if anyone wants to know how you can go about this. But yeah, so if we go, let's say, to our new page, let's go to a sample page. We can look for our testimonial block. We can create a new one. And then we get this, all these like kind of block placeholder stuff. So we say, lorem ipsum, this is my testimonial information. And say this is maybe given by Steve. Head honcho at WPNYC. We can select our image. Let's edit this to be square. Oh no. We've set up our testimonial here, and you can see we go to update, and we have our testimonial, Steve Bruner, and it's over there on the page. Yeah, that's the flow that I didn't show you for creating a new one of these from scratch. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. Like I said, I'm going to be uploading this presentation onto GitHub and all the code alongside of it at some point later this week once I get things into a little bit of a nicer place for people to look at things. But I think the TLDR is if you have done work with custom blocks before, I think this is something that anyone can really do. It's gotten a lot simpler with those changes in WordPress 5.7 so that you don't need to do all sorts of weird hacky things that you had to do before. But yeah, I think it's a really great option when building blocks, and you want to essentially blur the lines and have your cake and eat it too, of giving your clients really nice, rich editing experiences while still being in full control, being able to treat these things as data and render it in different forms. We didn't even talk about things like how this can work for headless WordPress and things like that, where this is all in custom post types, and it's not like part of weird blocks that you have to deserialize and things like that. It's just all available there in a structured manner for you. But yeah, so if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to field them.
Great job. That was awesome. Anyone have questions for Tim? Anyone? Here we go. Larry's asking, how can I start off with the correct URL for the meetup? All right, Larry, I'll email you. The other two, maybe someone else can answer that, but I'll email you how you can find the right URL to our meetup page. Anyone else have a question? Chris is asking, Tim, can you speak more about the accessing of data without parsing through the blocks?
Yeah, so let me go back to this code. And I'll kind of show how some of those work. So let's go template dash. And that's not the one I want. I want Okay. So this is a regular PHP template that you would kind of use in any WordPress theme. And you can see how I've gone about accessing. It's the same as normal. So this is a custom post type. So I am querying for all posts, or I guess this is actually querying for 5. Let's say number posts equals 100. And so we're querying for all the testimonials in my custom post type. We're having the basic parts of 2021, the get header, the while have posts, that familiar structure. In our entry content, we're just looping over those posts, and then we're just accessing it like we would normally in WordPress. We're calling get the excerpt, get the title. If we wanted to have the information about their job title, we would just call get post meta. So like I'm saying, like all of this stuff is stored to the custom post type as metadata, as native properties of the custom post. So you can use all the functions that you'd kind of be used to, get the excerpt, get the title, getting post meta, all that kind of stuff. And it is kind of like back to how it was in the olden days. Let me see if I can pull up. And so yeah, you can see that at work in my render function, I'm either pulling in the ID that is specified when you go through the chooser, or I'm choosing the current post, and I'm just going through those things as normal, calling get the title, calling get the excerpt, calling get post meta. I'm using WP get attachment image, all of those things. Here's some like custom Gutenberg stuff for getting block wrappers, and it provides all the custom classes and things like that. But it's really just straight up WordPress stuff. And it's just using the Gutenberg front end as a Gutenberg front end to provide a nicer interface for your clients to edit things with. I hope that answers your question.
I think it did, and Chris also just asking if you can access it outside the loop as well. I'm guessing once you have that post ID, you can do anything with it.
Yeah, exactly. Once you have the post ID, you can do whatever you want. The render block is set up to pull in an ID attribute. So if you wanted to, like, you could call the render block directly. You'd probably want to do that using the actual render block function that's part of WordPress. But yeah, it's now just a custom post type that can do everything you want to do.
Great. Wanted to see if anyone else has any more questions.
Yeah, no, I know, Steve, we've talked about kind of like this kind of thing in the past, of this kind of breakdown between of like how Gutenberg blocks can work and how custom post type things can work. I hope it was useful to you as well.
It was, and Chris is asking a good question. And I think the answer is probably a little bit of both, right? Dynamic for static, but so he's asking, he's been wondering about the blurring of the lines, but when to use a CPT versus blocks.
Yeah, and I mean, so I think, so there are some parts where it makes sense, some parts where it doesn't make sense. I think reusable blocks right now, there's kind of an unfortunate bit where you can have a couple of reusable blocks, right? But if you have like hundreds of reusable blocks, it can get unwieldy. There's not really a way to categorize them, things like that. And so I think, in my mind at least, everyone is free to kind of like approach this in different ways. But in my mind, I think that if the reason that you would want to store this not in a custom post type, or excuse me, not in a reusable block, is just because the reusable blocks interface can kind of get messy for dealing with lots of things, I would say that's not when you should use it. It wouldn't surprise me to see a world in the next year or so, and there are lots of improvements that are planned for reusable blocks that give reusable blocks the ability to categorize things and stuff like that. I think using a custom post type makes sense when the actual data you want to do different things with. And so I think that makes sense for things like testimonials. It makes sense for things like maybe user profiles, user bios. Like, I think most of the things that you would have done custom post types in the past still makes sense to do custom post types now, as opposed to like previously the option would have been maybe just do it as a short code. And you'd have a short code called testimonial. And that short code testimonial would be something like bracket testimonial content equals this is the testimonial, author equals my cool client, right? So like this is how you might have done something like pre-WordPress 5.0. If you didn't want to go ahead and create a testimonials custom post type, you could just create a testimonial shortcode, and then wherever you wanted to, you could copy and paste this. And so I think where before you would have just used a shortcode like this, I think that's when it makes sense to just use a block, and then you have the cool added benefit of reusable blocks. So you don't need to paste this all over your site. You can just put and worry about changing this. And now they had some typo here and you have to update everywhere else. You get the cool benefit of reusable blocks to use these in multiple places. But when you would have gone to the trouble of creating a custom post type in the past, I think that, in my opinion, would make sense to use a custom post type backed block. But yeah, and also to kind of clarify, because I realized that your question might have been asking something slightly different, is that I think realistically 99.999% of cases of custom post types that are done should be done with the block editor enabled and shouldn't be done using classic editor and things like that. And I think with these kinds of tools, and there are also things with ACF blocks, I think part of the thing that I don't love about ACF blocks is that you're not getting that direct manipulation feeling that you do with like native blocks. And so that's what I like about this approach, is that you're able to give that your client the best possible experience of like you're touching as you're editing, you're actually manipulating in a true WYSIWYG fashion. I think that is what's so powerful about this approach. But yeah, I do think that you should be using the block editor for pretty much everything and always be using blocks. The question is really just, are you using a block that is custom block back to a custom post type, or are you using the actual quote block that is built into WordPress and using reusable blocks and using block patterns? And I think the time to using a custom post type ones is when you really do care about accessing that data in different ways, because otherwise you can just use a regular block that's a dynamic Gutenberg block. It doesn't have to back to a custom post type. But backing it to a custom post type means you can do all these fancy things of querying and getting in different places, using it in the query loop block, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. The query loop block, I feel like changed a lot, changed everything.
Yeah, I think so. I think full site editing is hoped to launch in 5.9, which will really make use of the custom query loop block and things like that. And I think there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do there. Like we didn't show it. I showed in my example of where for each query loop item, it's using the testimonial block, the custom testimonial block. But because it's a custom post type, you could use other things. You could use the native post title block and just pull out the post title. You could use the native featured image block and just pull out the featured image. So I think the way those custom queries can do things really opens up whole new worlds. When I was first kind of putting together this sample plugin, one of the things I was thinking of, and you might have saw it flash up in a couple of places, is should we have a testimonial list block that has those things of, okay, I want to display all testimonials in this category. I want to display all testimonials with this, that, and the other thing. And then I was like, oh, well, I can just use the custom query block and it handles all that functionality. And yeah, it's so powerful. And I think we're only just starting to explore the different things that you can do with that.
Great. Really great. Anyone else have any questions? Or we're just all looking forward to seeing the code. The code review. I know I am. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. That was great.